Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Seinabu J. Marong with Hennepin Health. Thank you all for joining the webinar today. This webinar entitled Well Child Checks Growth, Development, and Safety. Oh my! As you can see on the screen, also we call it a great start for Minnesota's children growth, development, and safety. Oh my! The webinar is presented by the Collaborative of Minnesota Health Plans working to improve maternal and child health in Minnesota through the Healthy Start Performance Improvement Project. These health plans that you see on the screen include Blue Plus, Health Partners, Hennepin Health, I Am Care, Medica, South Country Alliance, UCare, and United Health Group. That's United Healthcare Group. The webinar will be recorded today and available for later viewing on the Stratis Health website. And we will have an evaluation for you to complete at the end of today's presentation. It will appear automatically at the end of the webinar. And by completing this evaluation, you will receive a certificate of participation. During today's webinar, you may enter any questions or comments into the chat box. And Nicole, my colleague, will be monitoring the chat box. And you can please direct your questions to all participants instead of just to the panelists or anything like that. Our presenter will be able to answer your questions at the end of the session. Our presenter today, and next slide, please. I'm pleased to present Dr. Krishnan Subramanian, and he is a practicing primary care pediatrician and hospitalist at Hennepin Healthcare, otherwise known as HCMC. He is also an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. Additionally, Dr. Krish also serves as the Chief Medical Officer of Hennepin Health, the state's only county-owned, state-certified health maintenance organization. And Dr. Krish, as a former high school teacher, he's also trained in pediatrics and global health services. And he served with Baylor International Pediatric AIDS Initiative in Botswana and South Dakota. He is the co-author of the text Global Child Health, and he also previously served as the co-chair of the admissions committee at the University of Minnesota School of Medicine. And most importantly, pleased to state that he also trains daily in pediatrics as the father of 3 lovely little ones. Today, we have Dr. Krish here to discuss well child checks, growth, development, and safety. Oh my. Thank you for being here, Dr. Krish.
Thanks, Seinabu. Thanks so much for the kind introduction. And I'm truly honored and humbled. Thank you all so much. What a great turnout. Thanks for spending your lunch with me and with us. And I have to say a huge thank you to everyone here. I get to witness through Seinabu and Nicole sort of the tremendous efforts that you all put in to, as a collaborative, as a community, to improving the lives of little ones and improving health more generally. And it's just an honor to be with you today and to share a little bit about my practice, some of the things that I love to think about. And truly, I hope that it's an opportunity for us to engage in conversation, to spark some ideas and to hear from you all about what we can do to put Minnesota's children off to their best possible start. So today, I hope to talk about a few things. I think a lot of my professional career has been driving to early intervention. And so I just wanted to explore sort of how I got to that and why. We'll talk a little bit about sort of brain development, brain building, because I think it's the core science of pediatrics is development. And so how does it happen? And doing a little bit of background on that. We'll talk a little bit about what does a pediatrician do and how I try to explain that to patients and families. Then I'll throw out a few sort of topical ideas that we can explore together and think about, what is our role in screening? What is our role in identifying challenges? And so some of those things will be adverse childhood experiences and events, stress, resilience, and we'll talk about some other screening possibilities. I think you all as health plans, as a collaborative, as the state, there's a lot of opportunity to think about how we prime conversations with families. And so I hope this sparks some conversation in that space. Next slide, please. So as Sainabu said, I started my career as a high school teacher, and I taught high school special education, and it's an awesome job, just a phenomenal job. And I got to teach really magical young people, kids who sometimes had struggles, but really did amazing things to overcome them. And I saw a lot of learning accomplished, but I did see some learning mitigated at really young ages. Things like meningitis, exposure to substance use, other health conditions at early ages mitigated sort of the long-term learning that kids could have sometimes. And I got really jealous during that time of my compatriots who were teaching in elementary school. And I was like, gosh, if we could teach a child to read by second grade, third grade, boy, you sort of change their life course. And there's as I did some reading, there's data and theory to reflect this. Some call it the Matthew effect. Stanovich here in '86 posits this model, but it comes from the book of Matthew in the Gospel, in the Bible, verse 25, 29, and it says, "For whomsoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away, even that he hath." And it's this idea, if you look into this Stanovich circle, that children who begin reading early have a virtuous cycle. They start to feel confident about their reading, and they read more, and they expand their vocabularies, and then they can read more, and it's a virtuous cycle. And similarly, children who struggled with reading and feel discouraged or challenged by it will read less, be exposed to less vocabulary, read less, and then contribute to that cycle. Next slide, please. And so, boy, I was really excited about teaching earlier, and I thought that would be such a great way to go about a career, and I maintained that it would be. But what if we got even earlier? What if we got to kindergarten, right? So there's a lot of research to suggest, and this is one study, and one of many studies by Cooper, that shows that the greatest predictor of fifth grade reading is kindergarten reading. So more so than social skills, more so than other types of academic skills, it was actually how much they could read at kindergarten. So those kids who read at a high level at kindergarten read well at fifth grade. Slide forward, please. So you could actually see this directionality. Kindergarten reading was predictive of fifth grade reading and math scores. So pretty powerful to be able to intervene earlier. But then I started thinking, what about earlier? Next slide, please. And so it's about this time that I came to the work of Hart and Risley. And this was early 2000s work and has been expanded upon since then. But what Hart and Risley did is they entered the lives of 42 families on a government assistance of some sort. And they showed that essentially the number of words that young people were exposed to actually capacitated their language abilities. So they showed that kids who were exposed to words early in life were likely to have stronger language comprehension, stronger skills in kindergarten. And as we've seen, that kindergarten level of reading then relates to fifth grade level of reading. So something happening between the ages of 0 and 5 led to more skills in kindergarten, and then in this studies to third grade, and then greater learning thereafter. So, as someone who was an educator, the question became, is kindergarten actually early enough, or do you have to try to get even earlier? And it was this sort of thought process that asked me to say, all right, how do you begin to intervene even earlier in the lives of young people? And I think there's so many wonderful ways to do that. And Minnesota does so many of those things well with our strong early childhood intervention programs and education programs. But for me, sort of the pathway that I found was to say, how could I be involved in early childhood health? And that's a long meandering pathway that took me to medical school and into pediatrics. Next slide, please. So we're just going to talk briefly about how our brains are built and why these early interventions matter. Next slide, please. So we experience a lot of neuronal connections and then experience edits to make beauty. And so let me explain that. We are actually born with all the brain cells that we will have in our lives. So we were born with 100 billion brain cells. But brain cells in isolation don't do anything, right? They're just glial cells. And in order to make them work, we need to form connections and pathways. So we need to form synapses. You see on the top little diagram there, those are neurosynaptic transmitters making a message go across. So for me to be having a conversation with you all today, I have to hear what you say, and there has to be neuronal pathways that go from my ear to my brain, process, and then back from my brain to my mouth and go forward. Over the first few years of life, these brain cells begin connection. In fact, we have 700 neuronal connections a second that develop in early childhood and life. And this proliferates, as you can see on that bottom left panel, this proliferates through school age. And then there's a process that we call pruning. So I think if you look in that bottom right panel, you see at birth, and then you see all those connections and superhighways made. But then there's this process of pruning, and that's the connections that we need, the connections that are most meaningful to us as young people, as individuals, start to get reified, start to get really entrenched. And that's what you see in that 14-year-old slide there. You see, still a lot of connections going on, but they're bigger. They're more entrenched. So there's a couple things that have to happen, right? We need to allow this proliferation of brain activity to happen. And then we also need to provide young people the experiences and the teaching and the learning to make sure that those important pathways are pushed forward. So you can hit forward. So these are the temple. This is the bank building at Petra in Jordan, and it reminds me of brain development, because out of this sort of beautiful rock, it's there's almost a carving, a construction of what is really the most important. Next slide or forward, please. So this is all true, right? Like we are going to build a lot of connections, and then we're going to prune and make out the most important ones. But what's really critical and why early childhood matters so much is that there is a critical time and an order to connections. So, if you look at this slide, what it's looking at is from conception to elder age, patterns of brain development and synapse formation. So what you notice is that prior to birth, you're building up a milieu, a genetic milieu, where mom's health, getting nutrition, supporting baby's growth is fundamentally critical. And then over that first year of life, there's a lot going on there in that first year of life. You can see in that arc, there's an arc there that says seeing and hearing, and that's the visual cortex and auditory cortex. Those are critical pathways that really do need to develop in the first couple years of life. And if you don't get those critical pathways developed, you're then unable to process that next loop, which is receptive language and speech production. And if you don't get both of those patterns as much as you can, it starts to influence how that third arc produces in terms of higher cognitive functions. So this is why it's so crucial that we have early identification of challenges in hearing or vision. At every pediatric visit in the early years, we're asking any concerns about hearing or vision. And it seems like an innocuous, almost throwaway question, any concerns about hearing or vision, because most families, a lot of families don't have those concerns. But it's really crucial to be able to identify those things early so that we can intervene and make sure that this developmental waterfall occurs in the best way possible. If you can imagine, if we don't identify a problem in hearing, how hard it is for a child to then develop language. And without some of those language processes, it's harder to learn the other higher cognitive functions. So next slide, please. So, when I think about this equation of how do you establish a great start, I mean, there's a component of genetic substrate. You need health. When I talk about some of those kids who I had the privilege of working with who had either some developmental delay at birth or meningitis at birth, those things mitigate health and development. So there are genetic variations that we have to be considerate of, but then there's also early life adversity, and we want to make sure that we're providing sort of the best environment possible from a prenatal perspective and intrapartum and then postnatal care. We know epigenetic mechanisms as well, and by that I mean things like stress, things like toxins that can start to affect both the genetic makeup of a child, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But all of that the genetic milieu, the early childhood environment lead to modifications in the brain, and then can lead to behavioral either positive things or challenges. Next forward, please. So a very simple. There you go. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. That this genetic milieu plus physical health, plus the developmental experiences we're exposing children to, including safety, including people, including interactions with family, lead to a great start. And now we can go forward. So this was a really cool study. This study showed that actually those conversational turns that Hart and Risley sort of identified back at the beginning of this millennium, actually not only using functional MRI imaging, not only show correlation with better learning in the years to come, it actually can reform the brain itself. So this functional MRI study showed that kids who had more words exposures and more turns of language, so it's the number of hourly conversational turns that children had actually greater growth in this very specific area of the brain. And in this way, it's sort of remarkable because language stimulation and communication could actually form and build brain. Forward, please. So yeah, a pretty remarkable finding using functional MRI imaging. Next slide, please. I think one of the things to think about too, and this is the great work of the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard. They have done a lot of work, but there is this element of plasticity that decreases rapidly, and we all know about this in terms of our ability to learn languages and piano and all these things as we get elder in our years. It's a lot easier to do that as a young child and takes a lot less effort. And so I think as we think about our potential to intervene, these early years are so magical. Next slide, please. Can we see if this video plays? It's a video there, yeah. Play it. Oh, maybe not. But
Yeah, it
here's
doesn't
what
seem to be working for me.
That's okay. No, thanks, Jen. I appreciate your help. Appreciate your time. If everyone could do me a favor, and you may have seen this on the news, but Google for yourself after this presentation, or frankly during the presentation, that's fine. Google for yourself dad and baby conversation. And there's a very, very cute video that you may have seen on the interwebs of a dad having like a straight up conversation with his little boy, and they're watching TV, and the baby's like, "Bah, bah, 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 bah." And dad's like, "Oh, you really think that? Is that what you feel about this?" And they go back and forth, and it's adorable, and it's worth your 30 seconds of time. But it's a remarkable exemplification of serve and return communication, and it's something that we really try to encourage families and parents to engage in. So young children are naturally going to reach out for interaction, and they're going to do babbling, facial expressions, gestures. Starting at about 6 weeks to 2 months, they'll start maybe with the smile, and then the giggle, and then the gestures, and adults responding with that same kind of vocalization, with the gestures going back and forth, is really fundamental to the wiring of the brain, especially in those early years. It reifies those audio visual pathways, those verbal auditory pathways, and serves as a positive reinforcement for this kind of activity that will allow the child to keep communicating with a specific loved one. And that's really, really important. So two elements of that. There's a biological pathway that is built, but there's also this social pathway between a provider, a caregiver, and a baby. And those relationships, we're going to talk about a lot, are fundamental for learning, but also for resilience and safety going forward. Thank you, Jenna. Appreciate it. If you don't mind going forward. So just the takeaways from this section on brain development, I would just say that the substrate of the brain is built early, but the brain requires experiences to continue to build and shape. And then I think something that I hope to emphasize is that attentive, loving adults and the interaction thereof can actually make this happen. So a good relationship, a good conversation can make conversational turns happen. We know that can affect brain substrate and physicality, and we know that can have long-term effects on their growth. So that's the takeaways from this section. Jenna, do you mind going forward, please? So here into this sort of beautiful, amazing space, I get the privilege of walking in every day, and I think we, as those of us privileged enough to take care of young people or be a part of young people's lives, get this privilege. When I have a conversation with families when they come in, especially a new family who may not be either used to well child checks or may not be used to me, I'll generally lay out the agenda something like this. Well, first of all, thanks so much for coming. Really, really appreciate y'all making it out. Today we're gonna work on sort of three things. First, we want to make sure that little Leela, my daughter's name, little Leela is growing, is getting the physical stuff that she needs to grow. We're going to make sure that we're going to talk about development and see what Leela is doing, and how we think she's developing and progressing in her skills. And then we're going to talk about some safety things that we might predict or anticipate, and try to keep Leela safe. The most important thing we can do today is to talk about any concerns you have. Do you have any questions or concerns? So, always starting with family concerns and worries is number one. But, truthfully, if I'm looking at it from a pediatrician perspective, some of the agenda is growth, development, and safety. Jenna, do you mind going to the next slide? Here are the things that, I summarized it as growth, development, and safety. But here are actually the things that we're asked to do as pediatricians, or as family docs, or as providers who are seeing a young child. This is the schedule of well child checks. And here are all the different categories of things that we're supposed to do. And you can see there, it's measurements. Well, you probably can't see because it's in small font, because they're asking us to do a lot. You're doing a lot of measurement. some developmental screening, physical assessments, oral health, anticipatory guidance, and then we do vaccines as well. So we're asking providers and families to talk and think about a lot of things on any given visit. One of the great privileges of being, I think, a provider to children is you can see the frequency with which we get to see them in the first few years. And that's actually a direct correlation to the slides you've seen already. It's if we can intervene in problems with visual development, language development, hearing development, physical development, if we can intervene early, we can make a difference. And so that's why we see kids so many times over the first few years. And it is a great privilege, and it's an awesome thing to watch them grow. Next slide, please. So I'll sort of walk into those three categories. So we'll start with like growth and physical health, ensuring that physical health, and that begins really right at birth, and right in the hospital itself. There's a number of things we do to ensure screening or to screen for to ensure health. And so some of those screenings that we do include the newborn blood screen, and my hat's off to MDH, DHS, and the state for all the efforts they've done to expand and make sure that we're identifying a lot of ailments that can really alter a child's life. So that's the list right there, but it has since expanded. Spinal muscular atrophy has been approved on the list, and a number of other things too. So my hat's off. We do hearing screen, pulse oximetry, and bilirubin screening. Jenna, do you mind going forward? Thanks. So hearing screen results from our colleagues at MDH is just a huge deal. Once again, if we can intervene at that very earliest time, get a child the appropriate interventions to help them hear, we have just expanded their developmental progress greatly. Next slide. Or next forward. Pulse oximetry screen, obviously, if we can identify a congenital cardiac lesion, that can be life-saving and life-improving as well. And then one more. So bilirubin screening. We screen in the hospital for bilirubin and high bilirubin levels, which is a byproduct of hemoglobin production and then destruction. High bilirubin levels can lead to brain damage and other health concerns. And so identifying that and intervening early becomes really, really crucial. So from day one, and this all occurs at 24 hours of life. When we're in the nursery, we'll have a little list, and these are the kinds of things, getting all these screening done are the things that the baby needs to do to graduate out of that nursery. So forward, please. So we talked about sort of physical health in that very first 24 hours. We also spend a lot of time. We spend a lot of time at well child checks, addressing and identifying concerns about growth. I can tell you as the father of two children or three children who are all pretty small, these curves can sometimes cause some stress. They can make parents worry a little bit about, is my child growing well enough? But honestly, the systematic checking to make sure that a child is following their growth curve, is following their weight curve, is extremely important, because what it does is it provides us an opportunity to see when that's not quite going right. You can see on this slide, on the bottom slide, or a bottom left, a child has fallen off their weight curve. And so it offers us an opportunity. And the earlier we can do it, we can start to see why. Why is that happening? Is it a question of, not enough intake, too much output in terms of, have they had an illness where they've had, diarrhea or vomiting or something like that? Or is there a metabolism concern? And so it allows us to check that in real time. And then similarly with head circumference and height, we can do the same thing. Is brain development progressing appropriately? And is the endocrine milieu of a child within normal limits? So, Jenna, do you mind going forward? The second portion that I talked about in these visits is development, and at Hennepin Healthcare we use the ASQ, the ASQ3 and the ASQ-SE, but there's obviously a lot of different developmental tools to help see where a child is at. The AAP has recently updated. In the last year and a half, 2 years, has recently updated our developmental guidance for families, and so it's our chance. And I try to be very, very careful, right? Every child grows on their own, they develop on their own, and that's a beautiful thing. What we want to do is, if there's extra support we can help provide, and if there's extra things we can do with the child to promote growth and learning, we want to be able to provide that. And as I said before, Minnesota is really one of the special places in terms of our early childhood intervention, 0 to 3. If a child's having concerns, that we can get them those extra supports, and the school districts are really quite amazing at providing that support. Next slide, please. And then I think sometimes it's really crucial to put these pictures together and figure out how do we intervene and help a child develop. This is a case, a story. You can see there's a couple data points on the left side of the slide. And that's when a child was seen in their first few months of life. This is weight. You can see that's where they were. Then they weren't seen for a very long time. And then they came back in around 2.5 to 30 months of age. And you can see where they were on the growth curve. It was checked a few times, and at that visit, the child was noted to be significantly delayed in terms of language abilities, in terms of fine motor skills and gross motor skills. It became actually so apparent that this child's growth and developmental concerns were a problem that the child was actually ultimately admitted and had to undergo one nutritional repletion. And you can see what happened. The child gained weight slowly, safely, but appropriately, and then was able to come back up onto the curve in terms of weight and height as well. One of the challenges was that we were able to get the child significant therapeutic interventions, OT, PT, those kind of interventions were done, and we have incredibly talented people in the state in those spaces. And the child did make great progress. I wouldn't say necessarily back to mean in terms of developmental progress, but really did make some pretty dramatic progress. We could go into the story a lot more, but I just wanted to show that this is the way we look at it, I think, as providers. Next slide, please. So I think the takeaways from this section, genetic and physical health plus the developmental experiences can help lead to a great start. And then any missing piece of this equation presents a challenge. And I think it really is our job to help families think through, what might be barriers or challenges, and how can we help to intervene and support families through finding the right resources. Next slide, please. So, that's a little background on sort of brain development, a little background on what pediatricians do in this space. I'm going to spend the next probably 10 minutes talking about maybe insults and challenges to this progression and this growth. Next slide, please, Jenna. So many of you have probably heard of ACEs. I'll go over it pretty briefly. But ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and we begin to think about the ways in which insults or challenges in that early childhood period can affect health can affect long-term development, and what we as pediatricians, what is our responsibility and role in that? Much of this work stemmed from the work of Vincent Felitti and his team. And this is a study that was done from 1995 to 97, published in 98. And it's a study that looked into the relationship of child abuse and household challenges to causes of death. Jenna, do you mind going forward? So Felitti and his team, based on other research, looked at these measured in challenges, adverse childhood experiences. So they asked individuals, did they experience these types of threats as a child? Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, and then a variety of household challenges that occurred. They measured whether individuals had these. And what they found, Jenna, do you mind going to the next slide? Is that ACEs are very common. The majority of people in our community have ACEs and have numerous ACEs. And I want to point out that this initial study was done it was done at a Kaiser Permanente community, so it was done in an insured community in California, and so it showed that ACEs are quite common. And what they also found is that ACEs had a dose-responsive and long-lasting effect on health. So every cumulative ACE and every additional ACE that people had seemed to have a more profound effect on long-term health. Jenna, do you mind moving forward? These were the measured outcomes that they looked at in terms of outcome data. So relationship to smoking, alcohol, drug use, physical activity, as well as numerous health and mental and physical health outcomes. Do you mind moving forward, Jenna? Thank you. And it was sort of a remarkable stepwise relationship to all sorts of challenges, right? So ACE scores led to earlier teen sexual behavior, depression, hepatitis, alcoholism, underlying suicide attempts, like just a whole bunch of health outcomes that direct correlated back to more ACEs. I think for many at that time, it was a shock or it was a surprise that these things that seemed to be the domain of 45-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds correlated back to something that happened 45 years ago or 50 years ago. So it was, I think, a wake-up call for many who are thinking a lot about child development. Do you mind going forward, Jenna? So, there's a lot of postulates and a lot of studies on how ACEs might affect brain development. But one of the ways that we think about is that for individuals who have experienced a lot of ACEs, that initial threat happens, and then we're spun into, today, if we experience a scary, dangerous situation, our adrenergic response will be high. Our fight or flight response will be high. Our cortisol release will be high. We will get stressed, and that's an appropriate response. If we are threatened or if a lion is chasing us, we want all those things to be happening. Yet, when our allostatic load is changed and that becomes a chronic situation, and that becomes a lot of the time, then we start to reset when we have such responses. So chronic stress is part of the explanation. A remarkable stat that from the Child Study Center at Harvard. When children experience 6 or 7 ACEs, there's a 90 to 100% chance of developmental delays of some sort. Do you mind going forward, Jen? we think about it in this pattern: adverse childhood experiences disrupting early neurodevelopment, then changing the way that children relate and use just as we've seen, right? Neurodevelopmental changes lead to behavioral changes, social changes, and then potentially long-term adopting high-risk behaviors. You can imagine that the kid, once again, who has challenges reading early, has more challenges and getting in trouble at school, and then longer-term challenges with school itself, and then larger systems. Do you mind going forward, Jenna? Thank you. I do want to emphasize stress itself is not trauma, right? We have positive stress. We have brief increases in heart rate and blood pressure when we do a presentation for a lot of new folks. We have tolerable stress. And I think about tolerable stress in the setting of, every day I'm in clinic, I induce stress. A doctor's visit itself is stressful. Vaccines, very stressful. But I talk about that as an opportunity actually to strengthen relationships. So I will always say to families, I'm really glad you're here with Leela. Thanks for being here, because something not so fun is going to happen. And then they're going to give you a hug, and they're going to come to you and snuggle you. And through that process, they learn that bad things happen, challenges happen. But it's through this person and through this relationship that I get through those challenging moments. Toxic stress happens when children are exposed to frequent or prolonged adversity. And I think it's particularly challenging when they don't have those solid relationships to buffer, and they don't have, and it's particularly challenging when it happens through those relationships. So, Jenna, do you mind going forward, please? That's it. Proactive nurturing adults to buffer the impact is just crucial. Next slide, please. So then we think about resilience and what can we do to support young people through this? What is the stress? Life is stressful. How do we help them through that? There's a lot of power in stable relationships with a caregiver, with a adult, multiple if you can do it. But yeah, let's get children someone who, I say every child needs someone who's crazy about them and who loves them so deeply. And if we can connect children to those people, that is huge. And then we think about these community-based culture, faith, hope. We think about building a sense of self-efficacy and control. And then Jenna, do you mind going to the next slide? This is, I like this because it's a lot of concrete things we can do to support young people and families. One of the things we have to think about too is that for many people, ACEs, it's generational trauma, right? It's if you have had a lot of trauma and a lot of ACEs in your own background, how do we work on that, control that, so that we can be present for our young people and be that buffering, positive relationship? Next slide, please. And next slide. Thanks. So I bring up to this group, we do not screen systematically. Most systems don't systematically screen for ACEs. There are a few out there who do. What is our role in learning about families' history, learning about their past? And then do we have the appropriate interventions to help support families through that? I bring up this next section of additional screening just to throw out there, because I think this is a space that we all have some influence and some power and some conversational ability. What is our responsibility in thinking about other places of screening? Jenna, do you mind going forward, please? One of the things I think a lot about, and I'm sure you all think about a lot too, are social determinants of health and social drivers of health. We don't actually, there's no concrete demand of us from child and teen checkups, from plans, from ourselves, that we have to search for social determinants of health or social drivers of health. This is the AAP policy statement. They would recommend it. They would recommend screening for basic needs to make sure that families are supported and have those nutritional elements that can be so important to brain development and have the safety that is also important to brain development. Jenna, do you mind going forward? You all are very familiar with this child and teen checkup checklist. On the left are things that are requirements. Social determinants of health don't come up in that space necessarily. It's very interesting, and there's so many important things we talk about. You saw that list of things that pediatricians and providers are asked to talk about. We talk about a lot of important things, but sometimes it's sort of interesting to me, and maybe this is just where I practice. There's no requirement for me to talk about, do you have food? Do you have housing? And so I've always found that interesting. We talk about important things. I want to say, I think screening for tuberculosis risk and travel and dental screening, all very important. But it's interesting to me that we don't talk about some of these really crucial questions of where do children live, work, and play. Next slide. Another thing, as we talk about buffering trauma and screens that we potentially could do is, do we screen for positive childhood experiences? Do we screen about the positive assets that our children have? Do they? And there are some tools. This is a tool from Bethel out of Johns Hopkins, who this positive childhood experience index. To couple with adverse childhood experience index and trying to get children connected with positive things in life. Jenna, do you mind going forward? I put here just a couple more examples of ways that we could potentially be screening for social determinants of health or other screens that we might be able to do to intervene even earlier. We Care is a tool that screens for social determinants of health. Jenna, do you mind going to the next one? And the next couple slides are a couple. Seek is another one that has been well validated and used around the country. And the next one, Health Leads, is actually a very popular one. I'll say that at Hennepin, we've tried to develop our own, and we've used it with some success at times. But I think getting the consistency and getting sort of the community buy-in that this is really important to what we do, I think has been a challenge for us to consistently do it. Just once again, asset-based discussions become really, really important as well. Jenna, if we go to the next slide. Yeah, just further, further screening for positive childhood screening experiences, assets going on in children's lives. I think sometimes when we talk about screening, we can get into a pretty deficit-based model. Thinking about what's wrong in a child's life when there's actually a lot of strength and resilience that kids can build upon. And I think identifying those, drawing those out, and building upon them become really important. The takeaways I would say is that challenging situations are common and early in life. They're very, very common in our community. They can affect child development. They change patterns of behavior and physiology. But they are not destiny, and I think us helping young people identify those loving relationships, helping those loving places, and sometimes they are school, sometimes they are football, sometimes they are music, sometimes they are the parent in front of them, and how do we develop and support those relationships. So if there's any word I think that I take to heart as a pediatrician, it's relationships. Jenna, do you mind going forward? For the economists in the room, there is an incredible ROI on investment in early childhood stuff. Happy to talk about that more. But in closing, Jenna, do you mind going forward one more slide? Yeah, so I think with this slide, just summarizing everything up, substrate builds early. It requires experience and attentive adults. Challenges can add up, but we can build resiliency. And then one more slide, Jenna. Thank you so much, Jenna. Appreciate you. I think some of the questions that I asked for ourselves, are we supporting and encouraging new families in the areas around this development? Nutrition, the resources to be safe and healthy, parenting skills and support. It's hard being a parent, and we've talked a lot. It hadn't been. We've talked a lot about how do we check in with parents, make sure they're okay, because if you don't have an okay parent, it's hard to have an okay child. And then how do we build up those social connections for parents and for families? Are we supporting children in these areas? Nutrition, consistency of care, language, and social connection. And then are we actively combating adverse experiences? And in summary, I ask you all just to pause for a moment and think about a few questions. Who won the 2023 Oscar for Best Actress? If you know, feel free to chat. Put it in the chat. Who was 2023's biggest YouTube star? Maybe Mr. Beast. I don't know. I'm not sure. And then who was the MVP for baseball 2 years ago? 10 years ago? Chances are you may have an answer to those if you're really keened into any of those spaces, but the chances are you may not know. But then I ask, who was an adult who made a difference in your life? Who was a teacher that helped your growth and learning? Who was a coach who supported you? And I think just about all of us can come up with one name there. And so thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I know there's a few questions and I want to make sure we can answer those. And so maybe we can stop sharing, and I will, thank you so much for the opportunity and for being here with me.
Okay, so we do have a few comments or questions in the chat. The first one is that how does TV input, educational shows, et cetera, affect the brain development in that first year versus reading and human conversation?
Yeah, listen, I think the data shows that human conversations are more valuable. They're better because there's a lot more associated with it in terms of facial features, facial movement, facial recognition, and then a lot of nonverbal cues that are crucially important for communication, and babies need to learn them. So I think human better than TV, tablet. It's not to say though that there isn't value in these educational shows, and I think what we've learned is that there is value in them, but it's best mediated through an adult. So actually, the best thing you could do in that situation is for the adult and the child to sit together and talk about what they're seeing and learning and hearing, so that you have a mediator to this. I think the challenge becomes when the screen becomes the only participant, then we're not seeing the kinds of results we would want. So, but great question, and I know it's a booming area of research with all the new technologies for sure.
Another question is, does this mean that baby talk and babbling is okay, or should the adults be talking adult talk to their children?
The data suggests that all the communication matters. So if you want to talk, baby talk, if you will, that's great and fine. And frankly, we would take that any day. We would take it. It's good. It's all great. I encourage families to talk like you would. Because that's kind of the cues that families are going to be, that the child is going to be exposed to. And so I always sort of encourage that, and that's the way I do it. But nonetheless, I think all communication, valuable. All communication, particularly from a loving relationship, is super, super valuable.
We have another question. What about neurogenesis?
I might not... if someone wants to clarify the question, absolutely a huge, much of what we were talking about in that early 1 year of life is about continued neurogenesis. I'm not sure if we're talking in utero. So maybe we can come back to that question if someone wants to Debbie wants to clarify. But yeah, all of this, I hope, is a component of neurogenesis. I hope we're cognizant that neurogenesis is very active and real. And frankly, we know that frontal brain development occurs very much even to this age, but really very earnestly till the age of 26, right? Neurogenesis is an ongoing longitudinal process. And I hope that some of this data showed that it's really profound in that first year of life and in the first few years of life. But yeah, happy to answer a clarified question too. But I see Christine's question, MChats. So we do MChats at 18 months and 2 years. And that, if you look at that long, big grid of things that a pediatrician is supposed to do, MChat autism screening is technically supposed to be done at 18 months and then 2 years again. So I think you have to value the parent as much as the child if you really want to be impactful. Absolutely. I mean, I think much of my work at Red Leaf Center at Hennepin Healthcare was around how do we support families? And then I think I can speak to this as the parent of an 8, 6, and 3-year-old. It's really hard. It's really, really challenging. And how do we support families through this? How do the children don't come with guidebooks? How do we support them in some of what we talked about today? Some of the importance and the impact that they can have. Yeah, as I said, if a parent is not okay, a child will not be okay. And so we need to take care of them. Thank you, Kate. Karen. Hi, Karen. Just think about ways to support, encourage children and families to not only bounce back, but to bounce forward after facing adversity and challenges. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm obviously biased because I work at a place, right? But the Red Leaf Center at Hennepin is doing a lot of work on multi-generational trauma, multi-generational resilience, and how do we support simultaneously moms, families, other caregivers? How do we support them through what they're going through right now? Help build up their own personal resilience and their own health so that they can be better relationship partners, right? This is all about relationship partners. Can they be better relationship partners for their child? And so thanks for that, Karen. And I see a couple. Thank you, Amy. No, absolutely. I think it's an evolving field. There's a lot of great tools that are emerging, and so I think as a collective, as a community, coming together and saying, "Hey, here's the direction we would push providers, push plans in terms of how we talk about social determinants of health, or talk about ACEs, or other important things to think about." What a great conversation and great opportunity for all of us. So thank you, Amy, and thanks for all the work you do with child and teen checkups. An incredible program, and like I hope I've alluded to, the state just does so much for our kids, and we're very lucky to have those programs in place. Happy. Any other questions or concerns? And once again, I hope, if nothing else, this just sparks a little bit of conversation and a little bit of more conversation. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you reach out to Hennepin Health or to Hennepin Healthcare to me directly.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Krish, for presenting today. And again, Jenna has shared the link to the evaluation link. And when you close out of this, it will automatically come up as well. You can fill out that link and you will be able to get a certificate of participation. We also remind you that the webinar has been recorded and you will be able to view it again in the future, and it will be available on the Stratis Health website. And the link has also been shared in the chat by Jenna. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. Krish, for being with us here today, and thank you all for participating. You all have a good day.